Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, we're moving into session 4, structure triage. We'll be introducing Chief Chad Gartrell. Chad will be leading us through the structure triage session. Again, you are here in the 4th session of Engine Boss online. We're sitting here today with the class that are COVID compliant. And thank you for joining us. And I'll pass it off to Chief Gartrell.
Thanks very much, Chief. Okay, so session 4, we're moving into structure triage, something that obviously we're going to be deployed by the OFC or asked to come out to the incident or hosting one in your own community that's related to the structure protection. Forest and assets outside, for the most part is going to be BC Wildfire, but the reason why we're showing up is to basically protect the structures, and part of that is doing a structure triage so that we can determine basically what structure triage is for us is eliminating the hopeless, so stuff that is lost or stuff that is something that we don't think we can save based on the amount of time and space that we have to the incident, versus ignoring the unnecessary. Obviously everybody's properties is a priority, and everything to them, including sheds and outbuildings and all those things. Sometimes people would rather have their shop saved than their home because it's filled with all their tools that they make a living with, right? So just ensuring that we understand that everything that we're dealing with out there is important to those residents, and we need to make that a priority. So once we determine what's already affected, what we don't think we can have a solid impact on, then we can deal with the rest of the structures that are around. So when we go through triage here, there's a new triage flagging system. Where's Chief Watkinson? Not here. Step out. Okay, so there's a new triage flagging system that's been introduced by the OFC, and I believe it was supported for last year, and something that we should expect to see for this year. So when you go out, when you're deployed and you're with your strike team and your task force, you've had your briefings and now you're being sent out, is there may have been a structure protection or sprinkler protection crew that's been out ahead of you that's done this triage for you. So we're going out afterwards as that wildfire has moved in to ensure that the systems that they have in place are working. We may be asked to actually operate them and get them going, and they have a standardized flagging system that is going to be used out at the front of that civic property access or address. So as you can see, we've got the red, so if that crew has gone in and taken a look at this property and hung a red at the front of that driveway, we know that that's something that we're not going to be going in and dealing with. They've already decided that the structure is a rescue drive-by and the residents they're out, and it's going to take too much resources, or we don't have enough safety margin for us to be able to actively work on this structure. So we're not going to go in there. The yellow is a triage only. Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there something written at the front of these addresses if it's a triage only, so we know what it is, or we just know it's been triaged? There may be an assessment at the entrance, but that won't come to. Okay. So there may be an assessment that's out on that driveway for us to take a look and get information of what we have. If they do put work in as far as sprinklers or hardening or the structure, anything removing fuels around that fire zone 1, the first 30 meters is they're going to hang a green on there, so we know that there is some type of protection in there. If they have a pump on site, you'll notice this orange color, so we know as we're going along, if that fire front's advancing and we know there's a pump on that site, either we can unroll the window and listen for it to see if it's working, or we go in and fire it up. That might be one of our tasks that we need to do in front of that fire front, getting to the residents. And then the other one obviously is this blue one, tender on site, which we know we have a portable water source at that time, so we do have water. So important to understand what these flags are. And if you look inside, I believe it's this structure defense guide that Chief Watkinson put together, you'll be able to see a page in there that has them. So keeping this resource with you in your apparatus on deployment is really good, because if you don't remember it, you can pull from it so that you understand it when you show up and start kind of reviewing your AO, your area of operation, going through and getting your SA up. So it's really important to know where are the addresses, where are the streets, or the driveways where we are going and where we absolutely aren't going, and making maps related to that. On the opposite side of the page there is basically how the categories that we can put our structures into. So whether or not they're defensible, it all depends on whether there's a safety zone present or if there's no safety zone present. So the work that we're going to do is based directly around that. Can we go in there, start the work, stay there because there's a safety zone, or do we have to go in there, do as much work as we can? And as much work as we can might be, and we'll get into this in tactics, is just knocking on the door and seeing if there's a residence in there. If they are, pulling them out because they're under threat, or because the property itself will put us at threat if we spend any extra time there. So yeah, and then where there are no safety zones, that's where we're going to go in and do some quick work if we can, again using our safety margin so that we can harden that structure as best as possible, wait till that fire front pulls through if that's the anticipated or expected fire behavior for the day, and then be able to go back and return. So doing that quick work ahead of it so that it reduces the time consuming work afterwards. Any questions?
There, or there's a bladder that needs filling by a tender?
Chief Watkinson,
That's correct. It is a location where the tenders need to deliver water to.
Thank you.
yeah. So you'll have a bladder in place that they're going and filling. Part of the structure protection triage report, again, most likely in the areas that we're going to as a strike team or a task force of engines. Hopefully there's been a structure protection crew that's gone through there ahead of us. They've completed the triage form, they've put protections in place, they've identified pump sites, they've identified whether we should or shouldn't be going in there. And this form is what they're filling out so that we have a running document of the work that we've done, the address it's at, and what we can anticipate is on those sites. Yeah, so here's an example of what those flags would look like on the driveway. So right here, it's been triaged only. They've dropped the bladder and there's a tender site. So we can anticipate that there's no sprinklers there, but if we need to pump out of there, it's been supported by this tender. We have a spot where we can pick up water. And then down below here, this structure here on their front address, they've put protection up on this structure, and it has a pump on site. So again, you roll your window down and you listen if you don't hear that pump, and that's the task that you've been given, or the tactic you've been given, is when you get there, you're gonna go in and find that site, fire it up ahead of the advance of that fire. So how do we decide? Basically, you're gonna imagine what the greatest potential threat is that this fire is having currently when we get there, and you're gonna temper that with the probable threat. So when we look above here on this fire, you know, what are we looking at here? Is this an interface or an intermix? So based on the continuity of those structures and how close they are, that's going to be an interface fire, right? So we have an organized structure. If the fire leaves this area, which is the fuel type it's currently burning in, what's the fuel type it's going to go into? It's going to go into those structures, right? Right in there. And then we're going to go from having a traditional wildfire to structure ignition. So when we're going through there to determine, you know, how are we going to triage these, what are we going to do, a lot of that is going to be based on what we think this is going to do, what the fire behavior report tells us it's going to do, and then observing it, having lookouts, and making sure that we are thinking about our 10s and 18s. Watsy, you got something to add to that? So obviously when we're working in something as organized flame front as that is, what rank would you anticipate that is? Yeah, probably, definitely well organized in the crown. So for us, to put a ton of resource down here, if this is one way in, one way out, is probably not our best idea. We may have to wait on this one. That might be the strategy that we take, is wait and see what this does. if this is, you look and this is going uphill, upwind, it's burning down towards the houses, it's back burning down towards, that's a pretty good situation for us. But if this is 11 and we're anticipating at 2 that a cold front's going to come in, that might completely change and start pushing down, and we're going to lose all visibility and start taking that radiant heat influx, right? So there might be work that we can do beforehand, hardening up those structures. Maybe we can get in there if we're tactically fast, if we're expedient with the work that we can do, but then getting out of there once we know that our safety margin has got us down to the point where we need to pull out to a safety zone. More along the lines of how we can always leave and then come back. So if this is backing down the hill and we're starting to get ember cast into here, that's where we start looking at the ability for us to have enough time, distance, and shielding from that organized fire front to ensure that we're comfortable driving through these cul-de-sacs, that there's sort of ornamental trees and lawns and pavement and all of that stuff. We're a fair distance away from that organized fire front. Now we can get in there and we can start doing tactical patrol. We can start looking for ember cast. We can start putting out little spot fires on the roofs because we're not getting that influx of heat right here. So this is an area that we could work back in as a strike team or a task force and then progress back in afterwards. So, and that way what we're trying to reduce is this entire area ending up like this because we pulled too far back and we let that ember cast actually start the bigger structure fires and then having it going from one to the other without anyone in there trying to mitigate that. So 5 factors to consider. Number 1, obviously, is firefighter safety. We've been preaching it since the start of the day. That's going to be the number 1. And then public safety is a very, very close on par. So that's why our rescue drive-bys, back to the slide we had before, is if we see that and people aren't out of those houses, great time to go get them out of that house, right? If they haven't been made aware that fire's in behind their backyard, really good time to go in there and let them know it's time to go. So that might be the tactic that we use to begin, but then we're going to transition and use a combination of tactics in order to mitigate that afterwards. So fire behavior, very important. Understanding daily, getting up in the morning and realizing what is the expected fire behavior for the day, what's the expected weather for the day, can we expect a cold front, looking outside just at your weather, and that's where that if you can do any of the fire weather courses, is looking outside and having an understanding of, oh, it's a clear blue sky today. What does that mean? What does that actually mean for me? Do I have stable or unstable weather conditions? The surrounding fuels, we're fortunate in when we host them in our own community, we have a pretty good, clear understanding of the fuel types that are in our communities. But when you're out on deployment to somewhere else, maybe up north in the early spring, is trying to figure out what those are, talking to locals. Lots of times, or especially what I've seen anyway on deployment, is you'll get way out into these areas, and a lot of the people don't evacuate. They're farmers who have seen this before, they've lived through it before, they have values, livestock, water rights, all those things that they want to protect, and they think that they're going to be able to ride that out. They're a great resource to find out, like, hey, have there ever been any old burns? And they can typically tell you, or what's the weather do in this valley later on in the day? So that can help you in your triage decisions, just knowing at what time of day things are going to start changing in there. Available resources, that's critical to know. Do we have enough iron on the ground to be able to go in and triage all of these houses? Or if not, where are the areas that we are either at greatest risk or we have the resources available to do the work properly? And then finally, the condition of the structure itself. So, obviously this roof versus this roof is a completely different animal. Wood siding versus stucco. Having a priority zone 1, you're 30 meters around your structure fire smarted. A lot of the times as you'll look at structures and you can tell the people who are really taking care of that and fire smarting and they're aware of the threat and the area that they live in. But a lot of times you'll also see houses that are, they didn't get around to it for whatever reason, and priority zone 1 is clogged full of trees and litter and shrubs up against the house and cedar shake and cedar siding. Still super valuable if we have the time to be able to help that resident, But at the end of the day, if we're making quick decisions for advancing wildfires that are knocking on the door, we have to make those tough decisions on those properties, and this is kind of the guide to that.